Hello and welcome everybody for another THWACK Livecast. This time is about the Orion Platform, Automation Made Easy. This is session 2, where we're going to kind of skip the web console a little bit and go to the API directly. So we don't want to spend a lot of time on this. There's a lot to cover, and if you're new to either scripting or working with APIs, we want to make sure there's plenty of time. There is a chat over here somewhere. There's a chat somewhere. Maybe you popped it into a new window. I want you to ask any questions there while we're going through. Our moderators and our THWACK MVPs will be reviewing that and will bubble up any questions to us, and we'll try to get to all the questions at the end. I anticipate there are going to be many questions. If we do not get to them, then we will answer them at some other point on THWACK. So let's go ahead and dive right in. First and foremost, my name is Kevin Sparenberg. I'm the technical content manager for THWACK community, which basically means I spend all day, every day on THWACK trying to answer as many questions as possible. And with me, I have Crystal. Crystal, say a few words.
Hi, I'm Crystal. I'm head geek. I've been around a while. I used to be a THWACK MVP, so, also in the community.
Excellent. So we'll start off with a simple question. Crystal, how much time have you spent doing stuff directly in the API?
Very minimal for me personally. I am not a coder, so it's a little bit intimidating for me because I don't do that. I like to say that I know enough PowerShell to be dangerous, which means I can probably figure out what it does, but writing it is a little bit more than I want to handle.
Okay, well, if you don't want to use it in PowerShell, you can of course use it in Perl, like nobody said ever. I joke, I kid. I know there are people there who like working in Perl. Same thing with people who like working in Python, or people that prefer working in Go, or internal cringe Java, or slightly less internal cringe C#. They are all available. The API is based on a RESTful API. So we'll get into all of that, but let's jump into our quick little recap. So if you go right now, you're currently on the page, THWACK Livecast. If you go back to this page after this one's over, you will be able to see part 1, where we discuss how to do a lot of, I'm going to put automation in quotes, in air quotes, only because it's not automation the way people think about automation, but in today's language, but it is actually automation. It's having a system do the work for you. We cover many scenarios.
I like to call it built-in automation. So it's things that I could do and I don't know how to code.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. Take this thing, stitch it to that thing, and then you're good to go. So we go over, I think there's 6 bullet points here. We go over that. Plus we talk way too long to the point where the video team was almost throwing things at me to tell me we had to get off the air. We just kept going. It was really a lot of fun because Crystal, I think you're with me on this, where we realize there's a lot of these options available. And because we've been working with the platform for so long, we kind of forget them. Mm-hmm. But that's not always the case. In fact, some of these, the dynamic groups and then putting templates on groups, that was released like 3 years ago or something like that, 3-4 years ago, many releases ago. But it was kind of like the 6th bullet point in the release notes. So people didn't quite see it. It wasn't bubbled to the surface, and it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, a lot of those options really fly under the radar for people. They, how many people look at the alert actions and only use the send an email, right? And there's so many options there for the built-in automation for you to use there, where it can do a lot more. It can do some remediation, and we talked about that a lot at the end of the first livecast. And I really encourage everyone to go check that out, because you might rediscover or discover for the first time things that you didn't know existed in your Orion platform.
Yeah. So take the time. Go watch that. A lot of the questions we had about this inspired this particular day's livecast. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of the absolute basics. So this is assuming you know nothing about the Orion API, which is 100% perfectly correct. We're going to talk about the absolute basics and kind of where that leads in with relationships. I'm going to talk very briefly about setting up a dev environment. If you do not have a dev environment, or stage, if you want to refer to it that way, it's great. You can easily set one up with whatever local hypervisor you want. I'm going to talk about SWQL Studio. You can get it on GitHub. It's github.com/SolarWinds/Orion SDK. and then just scroll down a little bit into the README and find installers for SWQL Studio. It does run on Windows, so you can just download, install single MSI, and it's great for exploring the data the way that the Orion platform integrates with that data. I'm going to talk about my own personal recommended tools. It's not for everyone, and I get that. I'll give you my reasons why. And then we're going to go over 2 automation examples. That one is unmanaging long down nodes based on the curious case of the down nodes, of the dead nodes, and then something about bulk renaming. And we actually swap the order on that. And then we'll talk about where you can find more of this stuff on THWACK. All right, first things first. Everyone knows what a node is. Yes? Show of hands? Okay, I can't see your hands, so I'm just going to assume everyone knows what a node is. So basically, it's any single thing monitored at kind of the parent level. It can be a hypervisor, it can be a server, it can be a router, it can be most of the things that basically NPM, SAM, vman talk to. Those are considered nodes. They are things on which we collect some basics. On every node, we'll collect CPU, memory, and response time. Okay, seems sensible. Almost everyone does this. We'll also collect, if they have interfaces, collect their interface information. And then if they have volumes, some do, some don't. Cisco Gear example doesn't really have volumes. Juniper, however, does. Linux machines show volumes in a number of different ways. Windows has both, so on and so forth. You're already familiar with this if you've been working with the platform for any length of time. The trick on that is interfaces, each individual interface can have multiple metrics, and it has to have these for historical purposes, whether it's bits per second in and out or a bandwidth like a percentage. And then similarly, volumes can have these things, you know, what's the current size, what's the consumed size, or the free size if you want to flip that around, you know, read IOPS, write IOPS, total IOPS, if there's a disk queue, you know, those kinds of things. And this is basically the NPM right now. If you add SAM onto that, then nodes have child elements that are applications or application templates, depending on your parlance. And then each of those application templates can have one or more, typically many, many more components. And some of those components can have multiple statistics on them. The reason I'm going through all of this is because I want to hammer home that 90% of the time when I start thinking about things I need to do in the API, I think about the node to which it is assigned. Whether it is an interface or a volume or a sub interface or an application component, or I always start to think from the node because that's how most of the system is architected. Yes, there are some things that aren't architected this way, but most people are going to be in this kind of space. So
I just want to throw in there, at the risk of stating the obvious, that all of that is opt-in. So you can monitor a node that's ping only, which won't have all this information. And you can obviously not have applications assigned or volumes or whatever. So just at the risk of stating the obvious, it is all opt-in. So if you're missing data on any of your devices, when you go through any of your exercises with the API, you know, go check out our automated discoveries for adding things from the previous session. So you can regularly update and make sure that those things are there.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, if you have something that's a ping-only node, like an external node, I did this with words failing Kevin, Microsoft 365. I put in like whatever the like outlook.office.com, I think is like the root for like the web-based OWA, and all of your HTTP, RPC over HTTPS happens on there. And then I could assign applications to it. And the only reason I did that was that it could steal the IP address. That is well beyond the general API stuff. So we're moving on. Sorry. Dev environment. You need to stop saying, I'll get to it one day. It's really easy. Almost every single one of the SolarWinds, the Orion platform products have a 30-day free trial. Is 30 days enough to mock up your entire infrastructure? Absolutely not. In most cases, most infrastructures are significantly larger than that. However, is it enough to kick the tires, number one, on a new version, and number two, to try to see if one of your examples you come up with works correctly? Yeah, it's enough, especially if you're just running very small, because you can always just run it with SQL Express. Don't have to set up an extra SQL server, or SQL Server database, I should say. If you already own the Orion products, you can talk to your salesperson about a small license for lab usage. So let's say you have an NPM 500. Well, you probably don't need 500 nodes in a lab. You need 50 nodes. So just talk to whoever your contact is, whoever you've worked with in the past, and say, look, I'd like to buy another smaller version to be able to use in the lab. And they will gladly have that conversation. You can always run this on a VM on your desktop or laptop with SQL Express. For me, that's Hyper-V because it doesn't require anything extra, and my laptop supports it. For other people, it's, what does VMware call their desktop solution? Is it Horizon, or was that the Mac one? It used to be Workstation.
It's vSphere?
No, vSphere is the server one. I meant the
not vSphere.
The small one.
I knew that. It's in my brain. It starts with V, as they all do.
Yeah. As they do. I think it's Workstation. Maybe it's been rebranded, but you can use something like that if you prefer. There's another one that other people absolutely love, VirtualBox, perfectly fine. Basically choose your own adventure on that. I'm not going to tell you you have to do this. You can do this stuff in production. Just remember, when you do this stuff in production, you are doing this stuff in production. Yeah, it is totally worthwhile to set up a small dev environment.
Yeah, I'll also throw out there, you've been talking about having a dev environment for your Orion platform and for your Swisql Studio, but you also would be benefited by having a couple of devices that are either lab or dev or staging or whatever to test against, to make sure that your code is doing what you're expecting it to do. Always recommending to test it first. Test. Yep.
I'm going to talk about Swisql Studio real fast. If you haven't used Swisql Studio, but you've used something like Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, it's going to look really familiar. And we'll get to this when we actually start talking about the queries. What I like to use it for is because it can preview the results of a query that I'm going to execute. So if I'm using that as part of a larger script, then I understand what's happening there. What's also nice about it is it actually has documentation built in. It also has the ability to show you where your data is connected. So nodes is connected to interfaces, and you can just use it through what's called a navigation property. We're not going to dig into all those details here. There are other resources for that. And you can also execute actions. These are referred to as verbs. They're a little pink box. I'll show them to you, but we're not going to dig into any of those right now because they have their own nuance and specific data types that they take. All of this is documented on GitHub, and there are samples on THWACK if you want to follow up.
Yeah, and I believe we touched on it in a previous THWACK Livecast, but it is also extremely useful for testing your queries just for reports or whatever, or for writing them, because it does all of that for you. It's very easy to write Swisql in Swisql Studio versus elsewhere.
Yeah, and it supports autocomplete. So as you start typing, little things will pop up and you can select them, or if it's the only thing, you just hit tab and boop, or maybe it's enter. I don't know. My fingers do things that I don't remember anymore with keyboards. It's just the nature of it. For me, for my recommendations in my environments, when I have scripts that I want to execute against a production Orion instance, they go on what I refer to as a utility server. Now, for that purposes, it's basically just another server that is minimal install, no SolarWinds software installed on it, maybe Swisql Studio, but none of the Orion production stuff, because you don't need it. Its job is to sit there next to or adjacent to your production environment to interact with said production environment, but not necessarily be a part of it. And the reason I like to do this is because then I have something that I know won't have connection problems. It'll be right there if I have to run something on a routine basis. It's something that I have on my infrastructure at work, so I know I can keep it super secure. And if I need to do any file level encryption, I know it'll be safe. Personally, for me, I like working with PowerShell. It's something I have said. I've said it for years. I've had a lot of time with this, and my introduction to it, excuse me, was with Exchange and setting up Exchange servers, because to do realistic configuration on Exchange servers way back in 2007, you needed to do it in PowerShell. So that's why I learned it. The other thing for me is I like PowerShell 7 more than I like the one that necessarily ships with Windows. And it's just because it's multi-platform, and I really, really like that. Oh, the other thing, Visual Studio Code, I use because I like a lot of the plugins and stuff it does in there. It also integrates completely with GitHub, so you can put stuff in, synchronize it, work with a larger team, and bring stuff back and forth with regular commands. That's much more kind of the dev-centric stuff and less of the scripting level things, but it's still incredibly powerful. And the reason I'm telling you this is because the system we're going to be doing this work on is running these.
And as Kevin mentioned earlier, I just want to remind, he's going to be showing all the examples we're going to be showing and discussing are going to be using those platforms, but there are other options available. That's just what Kevin's comfortable with. And as he's doing the teaching, he gets to choose.
And that's just it. If we want to talk about where I'm dangerous, I can copy, excuse me, I can copy code from like Python. And I can read it and interpret it and probably take a really good guess at what it's doing. I can do the same thing for Go, and I can do the same thing to a slightly lesser degree with more of the object-oriented, the C# and the Java. But I don't have the familiarity with it. Now, if you have that familiarity, that's why we have the GitHub with a sample folder with like 9 different languages in it where you can just build stuff. So, moving on. I want to ask a question. Again, show of hands. Even though we can't use them. Is the domain name in node captions important to you? And for me, in my experience, no, it never has been. It was just found by the Discovery Wizard. Discovery Wizard, would sweep my networks. I think it was once a week, sweep the core networks, do one hop, and then just pull everything in and import it if it matches A, B, or C. And
I'll
half the time that stuff will come in with full domain names.
In my experience, domain name is less important a lot of times because it's not automatically found on all devices. They're set up by different people, different network admins or whatever. And sometimes they build them in there. Sometimes they chop them off for the name that comes through on your Orion discovery. So it can create inconsistencies in the way things look. And we all know that making things look pretty is important. And if you don't know that, I encourage you to check out our previous livecast about making things look pretty. It is important for people outside of the monitoring engineers.
Yep. So if it's not important to you, there's something you can do about that. And again, this one's in PowerShell. And I encourage everyone, specifically this slide. If you're seeing this slide, this is what I encourage people to do. This is, you have an idea and then figure it out and then write down the steps. And you do this because future you will thank you, or if you move on to something else, whoever slides into your spot will also thank you because it's really important. Now, the example I'm going to show, there's a couple of gotchas in it, and I will explain them, but I'm not going to put it into the code because I want to keep this simple for our discussion. But let's discuss. So we'll find any nodes that have the domain in there. And if so, the idea is to remove it. So what we'll do is we'll search for all nodes that contain at least 2 periods. So similar to name.domain.local. We'll remove everything after the first period, including that first period. And then we'll update the node's caption to that. One other thing we'll do just for consistency's sake, we'll just, uppercase everything because, I don't know, people just seem to like node names in uppercase. I've been back and forth personally. So, all right. So this is what it looks like. Write down the pseudocode. Get the nodes with captions in fully qualified domain name form, cycle through each and every node, strip off the domain stuff, convert it all to uppercase, update the caption, then move on to the next node, lather, rinse, repeat. I will highly recommend writing pseudocode.
I like pseudocode because I can do that. I can do that. And it's the same, if you think about it, it's the same thought process that you go through when you're writing an alert or when you're creating a report or whatever in your regular day-to-day Orion, right? You're going through and thinking about what you need to pull out, what you're querying, less about what you're trying to change part, but that's just one added component to what you should already be doing. And as Kevin said, we like to be kind to our future selves and also potentially, future employees if they're going to have to take over or become responsible for things that you built. Or if you're a contractor, I used to work as a contractor. If you're a contractor, you're not going to be in there forever. So being kind to the future people having to deal with what you leave in their environments is always appreciated.
Yeah, 100%. And I actually like, I don't have it in these examples because I want to keep them clean for presentation purposes, but I will typically write this all in comment form at the top of anything that I'm going to write so that I can basically just go in between the comments and fill in the actual code And then at the end, I'll like clean up the pseudocode so it's a little more readable to whoever is not necessarily the first author, or realistically more clear to me in a year when I look back and scratch my head. But it's really good for a framework in that case, especially if you have a lot of branches. If something matches this, then you need to do that. And if it matches this other thing, you need to do this other thing. A lot of that kind of if, then, else, and switching, case switch kind of stuff is really, really important to kind of get down in plain language first, because everyone will benefit from it long term. All right. So here's your first introduction to a Swisql query for SolarWinds query language. I'm going to read it out just in case everyone has small screens. It's select caption, object subtype, IP address, DNS, URI from Orion.nodes, where caption is like wildcard.wildcard.wildcard, and the object subtype is not ICMP.
Now, I might be getting ahead of you, but why is URI marked as important?
URI is important because a universal resource indicator, pretty sure I got that right. I know someone was going to correct me in the comments if I got it wrong. It's essentially a single unique thing in the entire infrastructure that points to something. So a node will have a node ID, of course, and it's a numeric, and an interface will have an interface ID that's also numeric. And the interface on a node, the only connection are these IDs through some kind of, basically it's a table relationship. But the URI is a unique identifier. So if I pull a URI, and almost every single thing that you query in Orion will actually have a URI, because that's what you do to make setting changes. You use that URI to say, I want to talk to this thing, instead of saying, oh, I want this interface with index ID this, and it's on node this, and it has this custom property. You just need the URI. So always, always easy to bring that out. So I'm going to see if I can jump out of this. Let's see.
The chat has pointed out it's called a uniform resource identifier. I've never said it all the way out, so that's news to me. So I will also like to point out, while you're pulling up your lab environment here, that there's a couple of people talking about using something similar or different similar use case scenarios where only in the private domain space do they strip out the domain, and in the public space, public IP space, they leave the domain in, or reversing it where they are adding the domains to captions that don't have them. You can easily just change the where clause in this query to suit your needs to do similar things. So it's a simple change to something that is already done, unless I miss my guess.
Nope, you were 100% right.
Querying I can do. The actions you're going to do later, that's more for me. But this I know.
Yeah, and you are 100% right in that. And this is one of those things where I'm not going to give you a scenario that's going to work for everybody in every infrastructure. I'm going to give you a very generic example that can work in most places. And in a lot of places, no one monitors things with ICMP, which is fine. I like using some of it for monitoring some public web spaces that we operate, just to get response time, because that's really the only metric you get back from ICMP. But response times can be helpful in certain things, especially if you're looking at, I don't know, AWS endpoints or something like that. Not to hit a nail too close to the head, but here's what the query looks like. And if I execute that, which I already have, hopefully, I set this up a while ago, so let's see if we still maintain a connection with the server. I got to re-authenticate. Running query. So to execute a query in SWQL Studio, it's a little play button or F5. I am a keyboard person. I like to hit F5, and I've probably been too long. And this is the beauty of live TV or streams, or however you would refer to this. So, yeah, my connection failed. So I will have to reconnect. And I'm not telling anyone here. All right, let's see. Connected, 0 rows, cool. We will re-execute this. There we go. It sat too long. It does have a timeout. It's actually an incredibly generous timeout. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. I think it's like a half hour. So here's my example. These are a whole bunch of captions that have the domain name on here that I don't want. I don't need, I don't want. And the reason I like to do this here is because maybe there's something I forgot. To your point, Crystal, maybe there's something I forgot to include in here. Now I've already taken off ICMP, but maybe I want to say, oh, well, my ESX hosts that all have ESX in the name, I also don't want to do that work on them. So you would just add another filter onto your where clause. Super simple. But what's this turn into? That's more the question here. So if we talk about it, now we know that we have the right list of things on which to operate. And in PowerShell, at least, this is similar for other language, you have to build some type of connection to the SolarWinds information service. In my case, I said I'm going to do it in PowerShell. I put in the Swiss host name, DNS name, or IP address is fine. You send it a set of credentials, and you then build the connection, and then you use that connection over and over again to make changes. So, and I'm going to show you all these, then I'll actually go to the scripts. So here's something for the query. These are the queries that meet our requirements. We've already tested this and validated it works. Just like TSQL, -- indicates comment, so I can actually keep that line in there and it'll work perfectly fine. And then what I'll do is I will query Swiss, and that is get Swiss data on this Swiss connection with the Swiss connection name and the query is stored here. Now, a couple of things. In PowerShell, at least, you don't need to provide this parameter name. You don't need to provide this parameter name. So Swiss connection and query. I do this whenever I teach things because I feel it's best practice so everyone understands what I'm sending. Because in theory, this will also work if you do get Swiss data, $Swiss connection, $Swisql, because this command knows that it's expecting a Swiss connection first and then a query. That is fine. I don't do that when I give examples because I want people to be able to follow straight through. One other small thing I want to point out here, it's not unique to PowerShell. In fact, I don't even think this particular syntax is unique. You can actually use an @ followed by a double quote, and then a double quote and an @, and this gets turned into something called a here string, HERE string. All it means is we'll collect everything in between those, including end-of-line characters. And thankfully, Swisql interpreters and most SQL interpreters don't care about that.
Okay, and I know you mentioned that it'll read the TSQL comment there, but I noticed also that there's comments with the #, hashtag, whatever anyone wants to call it, the # in front of it. So that, I assume, is the comment for PowerShell?
That is a PowerShell comment, yeah. So this is very similar to what I did in pseudocode.
Comment may vary.
Yep.
Okay.
And then this is actually very, very similar. This one is how do I phrase this? I like this because this shows lots of things. So nodes to update, if you recall from the previous slide, has a list of all of the nodes. We're going to cycle through each of them. Then we have a open curly brace or a French bracket, however you want to call it. And that says, do the things inside here for every single one. We will take the node, we will take the caption variable, or we'll take the caption property off of that. We will send it to a split method. Think of it like a function, but technically it's called a method. We will split it on the period, and then we will take the 0th. All arrays in PowerShell are 0 based, so this will take the first thing. It's, in other words, just give me the stuff before the first period, and we will store that information in new caption. Cool. And then we'll also do another method called toUpper, which basically just uppercases any letters in there. It ignores, obviously, special characters and special characters, spaces, and numbers. So it just looks, if it's A to Z lower, it just bumps it to A to Z upper. Because I saw it in the chat and a few people, they translate them to lowercase. So is there also a to lower? Does that also work? There is, exact same thing in PowerShell, to lower. And actually, after we get this, I can show you how to get that information out of there. To basically get a list of all of these functions, methods that are available for these objects. We're going to write something out to the screen. This is completely unnecessary. I like to do this for one reason, and I'll show you that in the script example. And then this is the actual piece that comes in from SolarWinds. So we're going to set a Swiss object, and we're going to, from the node, we're going to pull the URI, and that's what we act against. This is why URI is important. So using the Swiss connection, the URI of this node This is the property bag. It's a term. If you're familiar with hash tables, it's the same kind of thing. Essentially what it is this here is the thing we want to update, and this is the thing we want to put into that on the node URI. It sounds really complex. Honestly, you do this 2 or 3 times, it's not a big deal. The nice thing about the properties parameter is you can actually do, if you wanted to update the caption and something else, I don't know, the description or something else, you can actually just add another line here and say description equals and whatever you want to write for that. The idea behind sending properties like this is you can send a bulk set of property changes to something, and you don't have to send them one and then the next and the next and the next and the next. We're only doing one here. Like I said, simple work to start. Happy to answer questions as we go. So let's see the actual work. As said, I am going to be using excuse me, Visual Studio Code. I will run here. So I will highlight all this, and then I will run this selection. I'm doing this in pieces specifically. So enter the username for this machine. And the reason I did it this way is because I do not want to show anyone my passwords. Yes, that's fine. Okay, so then if we query for stuff, we will run this query against our Swisql connection. So I'll execute this group. Should come back clean. Okay, no errors, that's good. And then if we actually look at nodes to update, well, there they are. This list looks very similar. This is the caption, the object subtype, IP, DNS, and the URI. And you can see how the URIs are actually structured. You could manually build these if you want. Please don't. It's just easier to get it from your queries. And then the thing I wanted to show you about this is the reason I'm doing an output like this is because first time I do this, I like to do something like that. So what is that? A less than? Yeah, less than, and the number sign is beginning of a group of comments, and the other one is the end. And the reason I like doing this is because then this will still go through and do the work. I will still get the output on the screen that I desire for the work that's being done, but it won't actually make the call. Great way to do simple testing.
It's making the changes without making the changes?
So it's making the changes in the object that PowerShell knows, but not sending those changes back to Orion.
Gotcha.
So it's on each of these, it's going through and actually figuring out what new caption needs to be. So if I execute this as is, there we go. So we are updating westesx01d.demo.lab to westesx01d. And I like doing this because I can be like, this is exactly what I want. And if not, I can be like, ooh, yeah, I want to change this query and try it again. Or worst case scenario, if I mess something up here. So one of the other things, now that we've actually cycled through this once, the last node in this list is technically stored in the node variable. The other thing that's nice about this. So here's the one there, caption, whatever. If you wanted to see what you can do to this, you can actually pipe that to a command called get member. So it's node vertical pipe get member, or GM is an alias for it. I always try to write the full one out. And this is something you'll get. Hopefully I can do a little scroll back here. Hopefully I can do just a teensy bit of scroll back here. Okay, so it's a custom object which has a caption, DNS, IP address, and URI. This is important that it's a custom object, but what is more interesting is you can see caption is a string. So if I pull the caption out of that, and dot pulls stuff out, and also this auto completes, so node caption. If I wanted to see what I could operate on that, I can also do a get member for that one, also tab completion, much longer list. So a lot of this is going to look really, really complex. Honestly, just look for the things you care about. For me, there it is. I'm using 2upper, but there is also to lower. So if you want to do that, it's to lower. Here's how you call it. To lower with an open close paren, and you're done. Get member is going to be your biggest help when figuring out how to work with different data types. We've gone a little far afield on this, but you get the idea. So if I pick the first node in the list, nodes to update, give me the first one. That's this one here. And if I go, yeah, that's fine. I don't care. Let me see if I can't get to my Orion server. I think I saved the creds. Probably not. I want to show you that we're not just doing this made for TV.
Well, and I appreciate you showing that, because knowing the data types is extremely important for changing data in those fields. So from back in the day when I did things in SQL a long time ago, making updates to fields in SQL, the same thing was also important, figuring out what type of data type it was, and sometimes changing that, but we're not going to be doing that.
Yeah. So I'm not, because now I'm looking for it, I won't remember exactly which one it is. So it'll probably end up being a Linux box while I'm scrolling through all these ones. But you know what? For the sake of argument, let's just grab this one to show you that it is in there. It does have the full name, and we don't want that. So then if I go and actually execute this script and remove my comments, in other words, just enable that area, and I'm going to clear the host real fast so we can see the back, see it all back. And then if I run this last section again, okay, it says we're updating. Let's see. Well, that didn't work. Yeah, it didn't work because we just updated it. So if we refresh this, also this will, the lab is currently in a uppy downy state where things are being switched around. So things are going to be off in times.
Yes. Thankfully, status was not important to what we were doing today.
Yeah. There you go. You can see that got flipped.
Now, I have another question for you. You executed all those script parts individually. Would you normally do that as part of the test mode, and then in the production mode, you would not do that? You do it all as one, or is it necessary to do them individually?
You do not have to do them individually. Same thing like Query Wizards. You can actually just hit the play button up here and it'll run everything, or just hit F5 to play. The reason I did it individually is so everyone could follow along. But since we don't actually need to reconnect, I could do this. And there was an example someone gave that they wanted lower, right? So if we change this to where I want to change all the captions that are ICMP, let's just change that. So all of the things that are ICMP, so we'll change that to equals. Again, this is going against what we had before. And we wanted the same, you know what? We don't need to split those, so we can take that out, but it's important. So we'll just do that. And we want them to all go to lower. This is why doing stuff in Visual Studio is great, because here you can see I started typing. It's a string object to lower. Here's how you call it. And it gives you all the possible. So I can just go here, close. Now, again, if I say, let's not do this, and I were to run this with the query again, which I've already commented out. So I'm just going to hit F5 on the keyboard.
Excellent.
Except, look, they're all going to that. I did something wrong. What didn't I do? Well, let's figure it out together. Oh, I forgot to actually work on the caption. It was using the last stored value of new caption.
Yeah.
That's why in a real production environment, I would actually do this. Or to upper, because that way it's all processed on one line. So if we run that again, this is why it's important to test. Okay, that looks better. All right, so easy. Again, there aren't that many. So the vCenter, a blog site, the SolarWinds Service Desk API, endpoint, Dameware, Pingdom, stuff that's ICMP nodes only. That's it. Super simple. And we'll get rid of the run debug window. So what did we actually accomplish there? Well, technically, we did what we wanted here. In fact, I showed an alternate scenario as well. We got all the nodes with the captions that have FQDN. We cycled through each of them. We stripped off the domain stuff, converted it all to uppers, and then we actually sent the command back to the SolarWinds to update the caption. And then the for each loop just did the work for us. Now, is this simple? Yeah.
So I just before we move on to the next example, I have a couple of things from the chat that I want to point out. For the URI, which we mentioned was super important, we have a couple of people in the chat, one of our MVPs and another member, that pointed out that if you move Orion, you migrate to a new server, you want to be careful. So definitely make sure that you let your query pull in that URI, because the URI will not change to the new server name. So we had a couple of people point out that was why it's so important to pull it in via the query rather than trying to build it yourself. Yep. And then we had another person ask, the field on a query doesn't depend on the version or component we have. And that was a question. So as I understand Swisql, it is meant to work despite what version you're on. So it's kind of future-proofed, but if you have anything that you want to add to that, Kevin, feel free.
Yes, so the tables that are actually called entities, and it'll actually be easier to show this in SWQL Studio. So this is not how it starts off. When you actually have SWQL Studio, there we go. I'm gonna pin this back, and then I'm gonna pin this back. This is what you actually get presented with. This is the name of your machine. And then this is essentially, it's referred to as an entity tree. So if you have SAM, you will have additional entities in here, specifically these ones that start with APM, just because that was the original name SAM had many, many, many years ago. You may have some other things in there. The reason that Swisql is future-proof is that even if we change the underlying schema of the database, like you move from, I don't know, 2017.4 to 2020.2.6, that's a major schema change underneath the hood. There's a lot of database changes that happen. But if you had a Swisql query that worked before, it will still work as long as you don't remove products. And the number of entities in here changes as you add additional products. So if you don't have NPM, you won't have these NPM specific ones, but you'll have other ones for other things. There's also ones for virtualization, these Vim ones. These will be partially populated if you have NPM or SAM. This is one of the reasons we really encourage people to use Swisql Studio. Also because it's actually pretty helpful if you're just trying to figure out what's happening. So if I expand to Orion, I come down to nodes, we're scrolling nodes. If you notice down here, and I can't zoom this in anymore, so I'm going to read it. This says there's documentation on nodes. It says it is a managed entity type. You can read, you can create, you can update, and you can delete. All those are true. What's nice about that is there are some things where you necessarily can't do that. So if you want to make a change, either create, read, update, or delete any of the CRUDs, you can totally do that on nodes. But other ones, like this one, I guess that says node port interface map. You can read, true. Can you create? No. Can you update? No. Can you delete? No. Because that's something that the system does automatically for you.
Awesome. Someone asked, will the network discovery overwrite the caption back to having the domain name?
Not to my knowledge, no. I think it's in there. If you rediscover it, keeps it. It keeps. Yeah, let me rephrase that.
In my experience, it keeps it as well. It would be net new stuff that you would have to worry about.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure that if it's null, because I've actually had this with IP address, where IP address came in as the caption name for, I forget, I think it was a firewall many years ago. And then I said, well, I'll just rediscover it. And I did. and it didn't change the name. And I realized, oh, that's because caption is something editable. So basically when caption is null, when it's completely brand new, then we will make a best guess. And normally that's like the sys object name. And if we can't find that, then we ask if it's a computer, can you give me your host name? And if that doesn't work, then we just stick an IP in.
Yeah, there are two fields in the database table, which I think it tries first, which is DNS name and then the sysname field. So if those fields are empty for that device, it'll just pop in the IP. But it shouldn't overwrite it. In my experience, it doesn't overwrite the existing ones because caption is a unique field that Orion creates for itself. I will also say that if it does get overwritten from something, I mean, this is a script. Hopefully you kept it, and this is part of what automation does. You can set it for a regular basis. So maybe you have your discovery running every Friday. Maybe you run the script every Friday night or whatever. That's part of why we use automation.
Yep. And yeah, being able to have these scripts and actually put them into, like, I don't know, scheduled Windows tasks, or the other benefit of actually doing stuff. And there's a reason I got to this. One of the reasons I like to use PowerShell version 7 and the Visual Studio Code is because PowerShell version 7 is agnostic as far as where it'll run. It'll run on Windows, it'll run on Mac, it'll run on Linux. I have it running on a Raspberry Pi. I've had it running on Mac OS. I've had it running on everything. So it'll run on all of those things. So if you want to set up a Linux machine that just sits there and does these, like, runs these scripts on a routine basis via some type of cron schedule, if you're more comfortable with Linux doing that, by all means, do that. Make it easy for yourself. All right.
One more question I think we need to address because it's relevant to this particular example. Someone asked do we need to worry about the caption being changed this way and it only being done in some tables, can't do correlation between tables. So as I understand the way that the linking works, the nodes table is the top level table. So when it's changed in the nodes table, everything else reverts back to the node ID, and we're not changing the node ID.
Yeah, there are a couple caveats to that, like agents. Agents technically have another agent name. You can just query the agents table and do the same kind of thing, literally the same thing with just a different target, and do the updates there. But most of the stuff, ESX was one of the ones that always used to kind of catch me up. But if you do it this way, I'm 95% sure that even if you rename your ESX host, they'll actually show up that way underneath your vSphere infrastructure. All right.
All right.
Now, this one is more automation using a couple of extra steps. So in environments, specifically larger ones where there's multiple branches, there is always a chance you have things that go down for extended periods of time. Sometimes they go down intentionally. Sometimes you, as the monitoring engineer, not necessarily the owner of said things, don't care. But your Orion system is going out every 5, 9, 15 minutes and trying to pull statistics from these things and being like, it's down. I just lost CPU cycles and a little bit of network bandwidth. So why don't you just stop monitoring them? Well, you can do that. You can find everything, sort by last uptime or whatever, and just flag them all to unmanaged or mute. Totally fine. However, it's not really the ideal scenario. So this came from a post from one of our MVPs a while ago who worked with me when he was learning the API and came up with this idea about if nodes are down for a certain period of time, I believe in his case it was 30 days, then I want to stop polling it. But while I'm stopping polling it, I also need to let the team know that I'm going to stop polling this because it's not responding anymore. And then I want to take that out of monitoring. So he had it set up in a fairly easy way. And I said, well, yeah, you can run this every so often. And then we got on the idea that wouldn't it be easier to just have the alerting engine do this? And this goes back to the previous livecast where we talked about letting the alerting engine do some of your heavy lifting. This one is where you just basically say, I need to trigger an alert on any node that meets this criteria, in this case, down for X number of days. And then I can use the email actions, because they're already part of the platform, to do these things. So this is where we got started. Does it make sense, Crystal?
Yes.
You're my litmus test. Okay, cool. Because you've had to have seen environments where it's so red because stuff went down and nobody is taking ownership of them, right?
Yeah, and I feel like I've especially seen this particular scenario in environments where different teams are using different monitoring platforms. So while they have some homegrown thing that they're using, then they have at one point had you add things to their Orion and then forgot all about them. Or for people who have that email inbox rule that we hate so much where it directs all the stuff from Orion to the trash because they get too many notifications. So they don't even know that it's down. This is a good scenario for either of those cases.
Yeah. Or they got it, but it was from 3 weeks ago. They were dealing with another meltdown at that time, and it's not set to refire an email.
I will say that's a good use case for escalations, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah. Well, we can have that conversation all day. I feel like next time we actually get out in the field, we just should have an entire clinic on how to get through your alert trauma. Yes. Okay. So here's the query. Now, I didn't invent this query. Ben did not invent this query. He found this query on THWACK. Someone else had posted this, and it's actually amazing. So in this case, we're just pulling the URI and display names from the nodes table. Big shock. We're joining that to a separate table called response time with the node ID. And I don't think you actually have to do this anymore. I think you can use a navigation property, but this before we had navigation properties, discussion for other places, where the time is, let's see, we want to get the current date and time on the server. We want to subtract 30 days. So where the date's above that, it's currently not unmanaged. And we want to group them by most of these fields. And then we want to filter that for availability, basically the availability being 0 at all time. This max function basically says if availability is even like a 2 in this 30-day period, then this doesn't qualify. This is a lot of SQL. Yeah.
I will throw out there too, the group by is important because of the join. So it is going to require you to group by your fields for the join. For anyone out there who is not aware of that, it won't work without it.
Yeah, you will get an error. You will get a very obvious error where it tells you we need to group by things here. How come you haven't grouped by things? Yes. So as all things, all queries, test. So here it is. I'm going to zoom in.
Enhance.
Now, thankfully, my lab is in a wretched state right now. I can't grab. There we go. Is in a wretched state right now. So hopefully I should have some of these. I hit F5. There we go. It looks like I got 13 rows back in, good Lord, well under a second. Okay, so these are 13 things that should be flagged. But I also see some ICMP things here. So if I were to do this in production, I would probably also, in my case, say ignore the ICMP stuff as well. Again, just change the where clause. But for the example that was posted to the community, they didn't have any ICMP, so it's moot. So what does that actually look like now that we know that this query works? So here's the thing about writing your own scripts to do this work. Since you're authoring it, you can determine what parameters you want to use. That can be anything that you feel is uniquely identifying this. In this case, we used node ID, which I will show you in a moment. You could use name. That's a bad idea. That is a really bad idea. You could use system object name or DNS name, also a bad idea, because sometimes that comes in as like the name of a load balancer instead of the actual individual. You could use the IP address. Again, should be unique, always unique, not always. You can use the node ID. We know this is unique, or better, if I was writing this script today, I'd be using the URI. We went with node ID at the time because it was just simpler for us. If we ever revisit it to put it into a new environment, maybe we'll change it over to URI. There we go. So this is the entire thing. So this one actually executes on the Orion server. So because it's running on the Orion server, you technically don't need to use this type of connection. You can actually just do -certificate for username, whatever, because the server knows itself and trusts itself. But this is if you want to run it somewhere else. So again, same thing we've talked about before. The only difference here is we are pulling in a node ID from the arguments. Basically, we will pass it in the command line. And then once we get it from the command line, we will just store it in node ID. We will connect. We will get the current date in universal time. Super simple. Get date, commandlet, and here is a method on it to convert it to universal time. I like storing things in UTC when I do monitoring because I have monitored in the past stuff all over the planet, and it's easier to just kind of have one thing. Mm-hmm. And then these are the two parts we're doing things. You can see we've got two parts here. We've got invoke Swiss verb and then Swiss object. So invoke Swiss verb uses our Swiss connection. The entity name on which it operates is Orion nodes, and the verb is unmanage. So if I break out of here real fast, I think I still have nodes open. Yeah. So here we are in Orion nodes. And then if I scroll all the way down, because nodes has lots and lots of data points, so I will scroll past all of the properties, all of the inherited properties, all these things with a little link icon are navigation properties. Basically, they let you fake out doing joins. So you don't need to do joins. These are the verbs. So get count of events per, boring. Interesting. Poll now, remanage, interesting, unmanage. This is the one we're doing. So if you actually click on that, and this will take a moment because it has to do it for each of them based on the product you have, it should tell us what parameters it'll take. There we go. So it needs the net object ID, which if you're familiar with Orion, you see this, it's always at the top. A lot of times in your URLs where it says net object or net ob ID or something like that. It's basically a letter, a colon, and then the unique identifier, the unmanaged time, the remanaged time, and is it relative? Okay, so when we call this verb, we need to send it 1, 2, 3, 4 bits of information. And the first one is a string. The second two are both date times, and the last one is a Boolean. So if we go, not there, Kevin, we're not there yet. If we look at this, you can see we are sending in a list of arguments. This is the first argument that matches up for the net object ID, the current date, and then when we want to unmanage current date, and we'll just add 10 years to it, effectively saying never. In older versions, you used to be able to leave this as null. You have to actually give it a date now. And then false, it is not relative. So this will do the work. Then the response will be stored in results. If results comes back, basically, did it run? If it comes back, then we will get the URI for the node ID, and we will go into the custom properties under it, and then we will set the custom property decommission date to the current date. And then we'll set the Swiss object, or excuse me, this is what we will build, and then this is what we will send back in the set Swiss object. This sounds really complex. Ben's post does an amazing job breaking them all down individually and what they're doing. I will not have time to cover that. So I want to show you what it looks like. And I may have not. Anyone that does want to check it out. I may actually not have this good enough to operate because I don't know if I took the time to build the decommission date. Well,
so for those not in the know, Kevin recently moved and the lab environment's having some issues, which is why
Kevin
there's
can't
been
use
a little bit of a struggle. But you know, it's live demo; it happens.
Yeah, so that's where we stand. There will be a link later on here where we actually go through Ben's thing. Why do I have it here? Oh, so I can share the PS1 file. That's right. I'm not going to execute this. I'm 90% sure that I don't actually have this particular custom property, which means this portion at the bottom will error out. But you know what? I'm willing to risk it. I shouldn't have done that. I should not have done that. Follow your own best practices. The script that Ben includes actually has a bunch of comments in here throughout the whole thing. So let's pick a random node ID. What do I have up here? Is that 123? Looks like 123. Sure, why not? So instead of doing that, we will set node ID 123. We will roll the dice.
I'm just going to throw out there, for those of you watching, if you didn't know you could get the node ID from the URL, you can anytime in the Orion platform. It's right at the end.
And if it's not at the end, it's right at the beginning before a bunch of other parameterization, but it's always going to be in there somewhere. All right, so I ran it. I didn't get any errors. Maybe I do actually have decommission date set up. Let's see. Before I refresh this page, let me see my custom properties. Where did I put my custom properties? Do I even have them on this page? Now I'm going to feel a fool. So it doesn't look like I have the custom properties on this page. My fault. Well, we didn't get an error. Let's see if it flipped to an unmanaged state. Now, what's nice about flipping this to an unmanaged state, yeah, I think it errored out on me. I know Ben's worked. We ran it a bunch of times. So this is the beauty of the live lab. It's just going to have problems. So yeah, his process works. He shared out the deck or shared out the script. It's available out there. The trickiest part for his was the alert. So if we go to the alerts, you know what's going to happen. I'm going to come back to this page and it'll actually be done. And manage alerts. And do I have it in here?
It'll be 2 hours from now when we're not showing it.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, if this was an edited broadcast, we could do that. Dead nodes offline for 90 days. Is alert to delete nodes. No, that's not the one. I don't have it in here anymore. But here's the ignore the name of this alert. I just want to get to the actions to show you how you would actually do the parameterization on this. So in the case that we had our nodes down for 30 days, slowest lab day ever. Notify the team it is deleted. You can see this is an email type. Let me push in a little bit. Wow, that's a lot. But that should display pretty well, right?
Zoom and enhance.
Yeah. So we will zoom and enhance. This is an NCIS. We'll notify team that the node is deleted. Perfectly fine. We can preview that. It basically just uses the team field. Delete the node from monitoring. This one actually is not what we would be doing. So if I edit this, I'm going to totally have to zoom back out. So this, as you can see, the little lightning bolt, that means this is a script. This is the thing I want to concentrate on. You see this line? This line will make you want to cry, which is perfectly fine. Let me show you what how you actually get to it. So that line that calls this script, in this case, because we designed it ourselves and we said we need the node ID as an argument, and then we have the name of the script, which we have up here at the top, alert_unmanaged node. Then when you go to fire that program, you need to basically pass it everything. If you've worked in the CLI or command.exe or bash, you kind of already know this thing where you have to send a bunch of parameterization to certain commands. Anyone who's ever done ping and does -t, so it just keeps going indefinitely, you've been sending parameters to your ping. You just didn't think about them. For us, I like to lay them all out very explicitly. In this case, for us, we need the script name or the script engine. Like I said, this is on PowerShell. If you wanted to do this in Python, you just point it to your Python.exe, Go, same kind of thing, Perl, same kind of thing. Parameters for PowerShell. In this case, we wanted to bypass the execution policy. We're doing that for this because it's going to be running on the Orion server and we trust it. Talk to your security team about this. This is not something I'm going to say is best practice. If you can sign your scripts, that's even better. And we also need the path to the executable. So that's in the D scripts folder. And then the script parameter. In this case, we are sending from the Swiss entity, the node ID. And when you put that all together, it gets kind of long and it doesn't fit easily in that little block. That's why I like to do it kind of in this way first, and then just copy it and paste it in there.
Understandable. You can make sure everything is correct. There was no mistyping or anything like that. If you have it visible somewhere else.
Because none of us have ever mistyped things in a block where we have to go back and dig it back out, right?
Never.
Yeah. So there's a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of questions, and we're already technically over our time, and I am sorry for that.
But I do want to touch on a few things. Danielle mentioned in chat, and if you didn't see it or aren't watching the chat, that Kevin and a few folks are working on a SolarWinds API ebook. For more information on the API, you can go to the GitHub anytime. That'll be in the resource links as well. And also, as any, like first grader will tell you, sharing is caring. So I invite everyone to make sure you're sharing on the Content Exchange, share your creations. If you don't know where the Content Exchange is, there's a different one for every product, I believe. And there's also the Alert Lab and Reports Lab.
So
and the
if you're on
Swisql
THWACK,
and the
you should already all be on THWACK. Please do not navigate away yet. You can go to Content Exchange, the Orion Platform. You can share your alerts, your custom HTML, your custom queries, your modern dashboards, and your scripts. This is brand new as of today. We haven't even announced it to the rest of the community. You're all getting a sneak peek by being here on this cast. So you can go in there. Some of our excellent MVPs have already shared some stuff. I shared some stuff in there that I found incredibly useful. And please contribute. Obviously, the better we have it in there, or the more information, the better off we're actually going to be able to help each other. So
yes. Yeah, encourage you to share, encourage you to ask questions. There's so many people in the community who do this stuff on a regular basis. And I also want to encourage you, if you are used to working in T-SQL, the swap to Swisql will be fairly easy for you because a lot of the arguments are the same, and a lot of the the functions are the same, so that you can fairly easily translate, but it's way faster than running reports and other queries in SQL to run them in Swisql because of the navigation linking. And they just run faster. It works better because it was designed to work specifically for us. So I do recommend you check it out if you haven't already checked it out, just even in general for your reports and things, because if you have a report that's timing out or whatever in SQL, I built many and extremely large custom SQL report. Translating it to Swisql will be helpful to you. And we do have a few questions that I want to see if we can get to real quick. Let's see. We have in the properties with the at and the curly braces, can it take any field or column of the target table? And is there any delimiter required between the field equals value pairs where multiple are specified?
If so, in a hash table or a property bag, there is not necessarily a parameter required. You can, in newer versions of PowerShell, you can use carriage return. In older versions, and I still do it out of habit whenever I have more than one, I use a semicolon as an end of line character. And then I hit carriage return because then I'll force it to actually line up below. So again, quick jump back. If I wanted to also do something else, this is how I would do it. And I do it whenever I have two or more.
Okay. Awesome. Do they need to be on different lines? So I imagine this question is asked about our query initially because it was rather early on. I will say that it's not necessarily a requirement, but it will help you understand it later. So it's one of those. For the
queries, it's not required, but for readability, we all do it.
It's easier to read when it's on different lines. It's not a requirement though. Yeah. As long as you have your commas and carriage returns and semicolons in the right places, it will still function. Yep. And let's see. I think that's all the questions I had. Let me just double check. I see lots of people sharing things that they've created, which is excellent. Thank you very much. And I don't have the answer to Mark's question, which is the URI eventually going to replace the node ID? We don't know the answer to that. And even if we did, we probably could not tell you.
My guess is no, it will not eventually replace it. This is not from any internal discussions, just from looking at the way the architecture is built and how the URI is formed. My guess is no. Whether the URI kind of path, if you want to think about it kind of like an XML path kind of thing, that may alter, but URI uniquely identifying a thing, no, I don't see that changing.
All right. Well, the last question is there any program to provide an official study guide for the SolarWinds solution? That is a big question. If we're talking about the API specifically, I don't think that there is an official program for the API. It's also not officially supported. So the SDK forum and the GitHub is where you can get assistance with that. You cannot get assistance with that through SolarWinds support. for the SolarWinds Certified Professional exams on the various products, there are actual study guides for that. There are actual classes you can take in the SolarWinds Academy. There might be classes in the SolarWinds Academy on Swisql. I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, but those are the places you can go to get more information. And then, as always, feel free to ask questions in the forums, the SDK forum being your kind of operative one for all questions around the API.
Yep. This is the place where you can ask your questions. Obviously, search first to see if a question has already been asked in that. Any of the green ones, people have considered that this has been answered correctly. That is voted on by the person who originally posted the inquiry, not by SolarWinds or by the moderators or anything like that. We wait for the person to say, yes, this is the answer. So.
Well, excellent. Thank you, Kevin, for taking us through that and for being so helpful and being super explanatory for us non-coders on how those things work and why you need specific things. I do want to once again encourage everyone who's not a coder, or even if you are a coder, to check out our previous video on the built-in automation options in case you've forgotten they exist, or if you need to refresh your memory or see here are some examples of what they can be used for. And then as Kevin has up all of these additional resources, they will be linked to the page once the video is posted, because it will be posted up on the same page later on, and you'll be able to access these resource links.
Yep. The SDK forum is one of the places that I am technically subscribed to in THWACK. So I get notifications when new questions come in, and I do try to answer them. And if it's not in my wheelhouse, I normally ask someone else to chime in. SWQL Studio, download it from GitHub today. It's amazing. If you have problems, so I wanted to take a very quick minute about this. If you have problems with, I don't know how to use the API, that goes in THWACK in the Orion SDK forum. Basically, tell me how to do this thing, and we will point you to resources where we go over it. If you're having a problem with the API and it's reproducible and it's giving back something that is erroneous, then there's actually an issue tracker on GitHub, and you should be putting your issues in there. It also gives the coders for the that portion to have a chance to go in and see what kind of problems are there and whether we need to address them. We have taken the update node script. It has been put into the scripts forum, into the scripts content exchange under Orion. Curious Case of the Dead Nodes, there'll be a link out. You can actually just search for Curious Case on THWACK, and it should be the first thing. The PowerShell script for that we have been working off of, although with many more comments explaining what it's doing, is also up in the new content exchange. And then there are two SolarWinds labs that kind of touch on this, the intro to the Orion SDK, where I talk about some of the stuff. So you can go into the lab archive and look for 86 and 91. 91 is more about customizing Orion using custom queries to build tables, but it explains working with SWQL Studio a little bit, and I touch on some stuff around how to work with like the navigation properties very lightly. We are working on an ebook. I do not have an ETA on it. It's me and a handful of authors, but if people want to help, if you have good examples, you want to contribute, please reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to have a discussion with you.
Well said. Well, thank you once again for taking us through this. And encourage everybody to reach out on THWACK to us or others. The MVPs in the chat have been super helpful. So thank you to you, MVPs, for, as always, for helping answer questions while we're doing our livecast.
Yep. Thanks to everyone. And we will see you next time for the THWACK Livecast. Thanks, Crystal.
Thanks.